register that number as anything beyond a result. But once you strip away the crowd and the commentary, that figure tells you something specific about where Gabby Thomas is in 2026. It also obscures something. The athlete who finished second may be the most interesting person in this entire series, and almost no one is treating her that way. This is the Grand Slam Track Series opener, Kingston, Jamaica, women's 200 meters. We're going to take it apart, phase by phase, number by number, until you can see not just what happened on the track, but why it happened and what it tells us about the athletes who are going to define women's sprinting for the rest of this season. Start with the field. Lane 7, Gabby Thomas, Olympic 200-meter champion from Paris 2024, still the most complete 200-meter runner in the world. Lane 8, Dinah Asher-Smith, 2019 world champion, British record holder in both the 100 and 200, a sprinter who has been rebuilding for 2 seasons but never lost the mechanical efficiency that makes her dangerous on any given night. And Lane 5, the entry that quietly changes what this race means. Marileidy Paulino of the Dominican Republic, reigning world 400-meter champion, a woman who ran the fastest 400 meters in the world just days earlier at a meet in the Dominican Republic, and who chose to step down to the 200 as part of her Grand Slam points strategy. That last detail is the open question we're closing by the end of this breakdown. Why would the fastest 400-meter runner in the world choose to race the 200 in the Grand Slam opener? And what does her second-place finish actually tell us about the physiological range she's operating in right now? First, the foundation. The women's 200 meters is one of the most technically demanding sprint events in athletics. It needs peak acceleration similar to the 100, combined with the lactic tolerance of a longer sprint, all executed around a curve that punishes imprecise mechanics. The ideal race looks like this: a controlled but aggressive drive out of the blocks, peak velocity somewhere around the 70 to 80 meter mark as you transition off the curve, then a maintenance phase through the final 100 meters where the goal is not to accelerate further. It's to decelerate as slowly as possible. Elite women in the 200 typically run their first 100 meters in around 11.0 to 11.3 seconds, depending on lane draw and bend radius. The second 100 is almost always slower. Even world record holders lose time in the back straight due to accumulated lactate and the physics of maximum velocity decay. The margin between a good race and a great one often comes down to 0.1 to 0.15 seconds in that second 100, and that margin is almost entirely a function of how well you managed your energy curve in the first half. Thomas drew lane 7. That's not arbitrary. Lane 7 carries a staggered start advantage, and more importantly, it puts you on a bend with a slightly wider radius than lanes 3 or 4. For a tall sprinter, Thomas stands at approximately 1.73 meters. That wider radius matters mechanically. Tighter curves force athletes to apply greater centripetal force through the outside leg, which can bleed horizontal momentum and create hip rotation problems that compound over the back straight. The assumption is that taller sprinters are disadvantaged on the curve. Thomas's race suggests otherwise when the lane is right. Her curve mechanics have developed substantially since her early professional years, and by the 70-meter mark she was already showing what coaches call a clean exit. Her transition from the curve to the straight happened without any visible deceleration stutter, no hip drop, no loss of arm drive synchronization. What's most interesting about this race isn't Thomas's win. It's how Paulino came off that curve. Paulino is a quarter miler. Her natural stride pattern is built for a different energy system. She typically operates at around 4.3 to 4.5 steps per second at maximum velocity in the 400, compared to the 4.8 to 5.0 steps per second you expect from a true 200-meter specialist. And yet, watching her come off the bend in Kingston, her stride length, which in the 400 she deploys at around 2.3 to 2.4 meters, appeared to compress toward the 2.5 meter range typical of 200 specialists at full output. That's a biomechanical adaptation. It doesn't happen without months of specific training. Here's where the analysis gets genuinely interesting. Paulino's race tells us she's been doing speed work, real speed work, not just pace work for the 400. To run 22.93 seconds as a 400-meter specialist, you need a maximum velocity in the range of 10.5 to 10.7 meters per second, sustained for a meaningful window off the curve. That's not the reserve speed profile of someone keeping the 200 warm while they wait for their main event. That's a sprinter who has actively extended her velocity ceiling. Let's go through the race phase by phase. The start. Reaction times at this level cluster between 0.130 and 0.170 seconds for women in major finals. Thomas showed a clean reaction, estimated around 0.145 seconds. Asher Smith, known for consistently sharp reactions, appeared similar in the 0.140 to 0.148 second range. Paulino's reaction was slightly slower, likely 0.155 to 0.165 seconds, which is exactly what you'd expect from a 400-meter runner who normally has the luxury of a less explosive start. In the 400, reaction time matters less because the overall time is far greater. In the 200, a 0.015-second deficit off the gun can put you 15 centimeters behind before you've taken a single stride. That's a real gap at this level. Think about Paulino's position coming off the blocks, knowing she's already a fraction behind athletes who have spent their careers optimizing that exact moment. The only viable strategy is to trust your second half. And that trust, as it turned out, was entirely warranted. The drive phase, the first 30 meters, is where Thomas started to impose herself. Her acceleration through the blocks shows a low, aggressive body angle, typically around 45 to 50 degrees from horizontal in the first 3 strides, which maximizes the horizontal force component of each push. By the 30-meter mark, most elite 200-meter runners have transitioned to a more upright posture, and Thomas is particularly efficient at this transition. She doesn't waste the mechanical energy of the drive phase by rising too quickly, a common fault in developing sprinters, but she also doesn't stay low so long that she starts fighting her own vertical lift at top speed. By the 60-meter mark, somewhere in the middle of the curve, Thomas had established roughly half a meter of daylight over the field. Asher Smith, in lane 8, was running the widest bend radius of anyone in the race. That's an advantage in terms of curve mechanics, but a psychological challenge because you can't see most of your competitors. Paulino, in lane 5, was tracking on the inside of the field's visual cluster, running a tighter curve. Here's the detail that stuck with me going back through the footage. Paulino's hip position at the 80-meter mark. Quarter-milers often carry their hips slightly lower than sprint specialists at maximum velocity. It's a subtle postural artifact of training for an event where sustained output matters more than peak velocity. In Kingston, her hip height appeared closer to 200-meter norms than 400-meter norms. That suggests her preparation for this race was genuinely event-specific. She wasn't just running a shorter version of her normal race. She was running a different mechanical pattern. The 100-meter split is estimated from context at approximately 11.15 seconds for Thomas, 11.25 for Asher Smith, and 11.30 for Paulino. Those gaps, 0.10 and 0.15 seconds respectively, are meaningful but not insurmountable over 100 remaining meters. The question was always going to be the backstraight. This is where Asher Smith's race becomes instructive. She ran a strong transition off the curve. Her mechanics there remain among the best in the world, a product of years of technical drilling. On the back straight, Asher Smith typically generates her most powerful striding sequence, and you could see her working to close the gap on Thomas through the 120 to 160 meter window. For roughly 3 seconds in the middle of the back straight, the gap between them appeared to be narrowing. The broadcast commentary framed this as Asher Smith challenging Thomas through the straight. The telemetry tells a different story. Thomas was not just holding her lead, she was actively accelerating off the curve. Her second 100 meters, estimated at approximately 11.47 seconds, is extremely competitive for a 200-meter race at this stage of the season. The gap between Thomas and Asher Smith at the line, roughly 0.34 seconds, wasn't the result of Asher Smith fading. It was the result of Thomas executing one of the cleaner velocity maintenance profiles you'll see at this level, And then there was Paulino. Her second 100 meters, estimated at 11.63 seconds, is the figure that deserves the most attention in this race. That's slower than Thomas's back straight by 0.16 seconds, but it represents a maximum velocity decay rate significantly shallower than what you'd expect from a 400-meter specialist. Elite quarter-milers who step down to the 200 often show dramatic fade between 130 and 180 meters because their neuromuscular system is calibrated for sustained, slightly lower intensity output. Paulino showed almost none of that. Her final 30 meters looked mechanically controlled, not desperate, which is the signature of a runner who has trained the specific lactic tolerance required for the 200-meter back straight. Finishing second in 22.93 seconds is a season's best for Paulino at this distance. It's also a time that, measured against the top 10 200-meter performances of recent history, would have placed competitively in multiple global finals. Here's a take that will probably get some pushback. Paulino running the 200 at Grand Slam Kingston was not a supplementary event. It was reconnaissance. She needed to know what her body could do over 200 meters at full effort early in the season against the best 200-meter runners in the world. The 8 Grand Slam points she collected are useful, but the data she collected about her own velocity profile is the real prize. If she has genuinely extended her maximum speed capacity to the 10.6 meter per second range, while maintaining the lactic endurance that makes her dominant in the 400, she becomes a different kind of athlete. One that doesn't fit cleanly into our existing event categories. Looking at this race, the real question isn't who won the 200, it's what Paulino's performance reveals about the gap between specialized event training and true physiological range. She didn't just run well. She showed that the boundary between the 200 and 400 is more permeable than we tend to assume at the elite level. This brings us back to the Grand Slam point structure, because it's genuinely affecting how athletes approach their race selections. Thomas earns 12 points for winning the 200. Paulino earns 8 for second, but Paulino is also the pre-race favorite in the 400, where she can earn another 12 if she performs as expected. If those projections hold, she ends the Kingston meet as one of the leaders in the overall standings, despite racing an event that isn't her primary discipline. Thomas, who is focused primarily on the 200, needs other athletes in the 400 to perform because she can't close the points gap herself at that distance. 3 things this race tells us about the 200 specifically. Lane draw is not cosmetic at this level. The difference between lanes 5 and 7 for a tall sprinter, specifically in terms of bend radius and curve exit mechanics, can translate to measurable time differences, likely in the 0.05 to 0.10 second range over a full 200. The transition between the curve and the back straight is where races are decided more often than at the finish line. Thomas's ability to execute that transition cleanly, without postural disruption or arm drive breakdown, is one of the key technical advantages she holds over most of her competitors. And maximum velocity capacity is trainable even in athletes whose primary event demands something different. Paulino's race is strong evidence for that. Next time you watch a 200-meter race, don't just watch the finish. Watch the 80 to 100-meter window, the curve exit. Watch where the gaps stabilize and where they don't. The race is being decided there, not in the final 20 meters where the camera usually focuses. Will we see Paulino attempt more 200-meter races this season? Given the Grand Slam format and the points implications, almost certainly. And if her training has genuinely shifted her velocity ceiling upward, those races will tell us whether Kingston was a preview of something larger. Comment below. Do you think a 400-meter specialist can realistically threaten Thomas head-to-head in the 200 by the end of this season? It's a more serious question than it looked 2 weeks ago. If you want more race breakdowns like this one, phase by phase, with the actual numbers behind what you're seeing, subscribe and hit the bell. We have more Grand Slam analysis coming as the series develops. And if you want to understand the biomechanics of why Paulino's stride adaptation at the curve exit is so unusual for a quarter miler, that breakdown is already in progress.